On the night Seo Yujin died, Jiyoon was drafting a contract she didn't believe in. The office was almost empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft buzz of computer fans. Seoul spread outside the glass like a sea of broken stars. Her cursor blinked over a clause that shifted all blame to the artist in case of reputation damage. The kind of thing she had learned not to flinch at. Tonight it made her fingers freeze above the keyboard. She rubbed her tired eyes and checked the name at the top of the document again. Seo Yujin, top idol, nation's sweetheart, walking headline. To most of the country, he was a dream in human form. To her, he was a case file number, a schedule of appearances and penalties, a face that lived in posters tacked up around the lobby. But there was a quiet space in her chest that recognized his voice by ear alone. She never said that out loud. It was easier to pretend she'd given up on things like dreams when she'd walked away from music school and into a legal department internship. Easier to be practical. To tell herself the world didn't need another singer with a trembling stage voice and a scholarship she'd nearly lost twice. She pressed the pen into the margin of the printed contract, circling a sentence, drawing a tiny dot where the wording turned cruel. Her superior had told her, use the standard clause. Protects us. It sounded simple on paper, until she remembered the way idols looked when they passed her in the hallway. Thin, exhausted, shoulders squared like they were always bracing for impact. Jiyoon sighed and looked up at the wall clock. 11:47 p.m. The last bus was gone. Again. The watch on her own wrist was useless. It had stopped ticking years ago. A vintage piece with a round face and a delicate leather strap. It had belonged to her grandmother. The second hand was frozen between 8 and 9, as if time itself had tripped and never got back up. Her grandmother had pressed it into her palm the last summer before she died. The metal strangely warm despite never being worn. Time only moves for a wish you truly mean, she'd said, eyes milky but sharp. But remember, Jiyoon, time is greedy. It never helps without taking something in return. Back then, Jiyoon had laughed softly and kissed the old woman's forehead. Now the memory felt like someone else's life. She wore the watch anyway, out of habit and leftover love, not belief. It was broken, like the piano she never went back to. Her phone buzzed with a push notification, the sound too loud in the empty office. She glanced down absently, expecting another promotional reminder or sale alert. The headlines smashed the air out of her lungs. Breaking news: idol Seo Yujin found dead in apparent suicide after drug allegations. For a moment the room went silent. The hum, the distant traffic, even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to fall away. Her eyes ran over the screen again and again, refusing the shape of the words. No, she whispered. The word came out hoarse, as if she had been shouting for hours. A photo of him filled the screen when she tapped the article. Yujin in a black suit on a red carpet, smiling at cameras, eyes crinkled in a way that made him look younger than his years. The caption below was clinical, detached. A male celebrity in his late 20s. A suspected overdose. Drugs discovered in his apartment. Police investigating possible suicide linked to the recent scandal. There it was, the scandal. The one that had been quietly simmering all week. A rumor that had turned into an anonymous tip. Turned into an internal memo she had been asked to review. Allegations of illegal substances found in his system. No concrete proof. Just enough smoke to suggest a fire. Her hand shook as she dug through the files on her desk, slamming folders aside until she found the one with his name. The one that had been dropped on her table 3 days ago. Quick review, just check the phrasing, her boss had said. Don't worry about the facts. PR and the executives handle that. She hadn't checked the facts. She'd done exactly as she was told. She flipped through the printed emails and draft statements, eyes catching on highlighted lines. Anonymous source. Unverified but consistent accounts. Necessary to protect the company's reputation. Protect the company. She remembered the phone call she had overheard in the hallway. A man's low voice, clipped and annoyed. If this explodes, we pin it on him. If he breaks, he breaks. That's the risk of being at the top. It had bothered her for a moment. Not enough to stop working. Not enough to be anything more than a splinter under her skin, as she drafted the clauses that shifted responsibility. A hollow feeling opened up inside her, spreading like ink in water. If the scandal hadn't blown up, would he still be alive? If she had pushed back on the wording, asked questions, delayed the release, just a day, an hour, would anything be different? Her mind supplied another image. A short clip from his last music show appearance, one she'd watched on her commute. He'd bowed to the crowd, sweat shining under stage lights, and when he lifted his head to look into the camera, the smile on his lips didn't quite reach his eyes. She'd noticed. She'd done nothing. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the desk with a dull sound. Her chest felt tight, like the building itself had tilted and poured all the air out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But the apology went nowhere, dissolved between the walls and the paperwork. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap against the window glass, faint at first, then steadier, like fingers drumming a restless rhythm. She took the old watch in her hand, fingers tracing the cracked glass. The face was scratched, the numbers almost faded. It had never moved. It never would. Still, she clutched it until the metal cut into her palm, an anchor for the storm inside. "If I could go back," she breathed, the words barely more than air. "If I could go back, I'd save you." The lights flickered. It was subtle enough that she almost missed it, the overhead fluorescence dimming for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. The wall clock stuttered, the second hand skipping, then spinning wildly for half a turn before snapping still. Her heart stumbled. She looked down at the watch in her hand. The frozen second hand was moving. At first, it trembled, as if deciding which direction to take. Then it began to tick backward. 1, 2, 3 seconds in reverse, then faster, the hands whirling, minutes, hours, years pouring back in tight circles. The air grew thick, as if the room were filling with water. Sound warped. The rain turned into a distant roar, the city lights outside smearing and curving, bending into streaks that ran upward instead of down. Papers lifted from her desk, floating weightless, every printed word peeling away from the page like ash. "No," she whispered again. But this time it was disbelief, not denial. The watch was glowing, a faint pale gold that seeped through the cracks in the glass and into her skin. It wasn't warm or cold. It was a sensation like pins and needles, like waking up after having slept on her arm. Somewhere under the rising panic, a memory stirred. Time only moves for a wish you truly mean. The floor lurched. She grabbed the edge of the desk, but her fingers slid through it like it was smoke. The room dissolved into darkness, not empty but full, thick with the echo of reversed footsteps, traffic backing up, laughter sucked inward instead of spilling out. For one stretched, impossible moment she felt herself being pulled through the narrow space between seconds, through a world made only of ticking. Then she fell. The impact was sharp and real. Her knees hit asphalt, cold and rough. The smell of exhaust and damp concrete rushed into her lungs. A honk blared right above her, followed by a shout. "Hey! Watch out!" Tires screeched to a halt inches from her hand. A bicycle wheel trembled in front of her face, spokes spinning, droplets of water flung into the air. She stared at it, heart pounding, then lifted her gaze. The boy on the bike. No, the young man was breathing hard, one foot on the ground, one still on the pedal, hands tight on the handlebars. His black cap was pushed back just enough for his damp bangs to cling to his forehead, eyes wide with adrenaline and irritation. Seo Yujin was very much alive. For a second, her mind refused to connect the person in front of her with the glossy images from posters and screens. There were no stage lights or flawless styling here, just a worn hoodie, scuffed sneakers, and a backpack slung across his shoulder. But the lines of his face, the curve of his mouth, the tilt of his eyes, she knew them. She'd spent years pretending she didn't. "Are you crazy?" he snapped, breath puffing in the chill air. "You can't just step into the road like that." His voice was lower than she expected, a bit rough, but there was a familiar tone under the scolding, something she'd heard in interviews when he joked with fans. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Her throat had gone dry. Her fingers dug into the wet ground, searching for something solid to hold on to. "Are you hurt?" The irritation faded a little, replaced by caution. He hopped off the bike and leaned it against a nearby pole, then crouched down to her level. The rain was a fine mist now, more like the air was wet than that it was falling. He reached out, hesitating just a moment before his hand hovered near her arm. "Can you stand?" That small kindness cracked something open in her. Her eyes filled with tears without warning, the shock melting into a deep, aching relief. Alive. He was alive, and close enough that she could see the faint freckle under his left eye that no camera ever caught. "Seo Yujin," she whispered. He blinked. "You know me?" Of course she did. He wasn't famous yet, not like in the future, but the company logo on his backpack, the trainee ID card clipped to his zipper. She recognized it all. 12 years of working in the same building had trained her eyes. She forced herself to nod, swallowing the rush of words that wanted to spill out. "You're supposed to be dead. I saw your name in a headline. I watched the news anchors pick apart your life like it was a crime scene." Instead, she clung to the one truth that felt safe enough to say. "You're alive," she said, voice trembling. "You're really alive." He frowned, confusion knitting his brows together. "Well, yeah, I think so." His mouth tugged into a slightly incredulous half-smile. "Unless I got hit harder than I thought." He glanced down at her scraped knees, then at her wrist. The watch was still there, cool and silent against her skin, as if it had never moved at all. The city around them looked almost familiar, but the billboards were different, older advertisements glowing in faded colors. The convenience store across the street displayed a logo she hadn't seen in years, the older version long replaced in her timeline. Cars passed by with models she remembered from university days. The world was wrong in small, undeniable ways. "What year is it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He stared at her. "No way you hit your head that hard." She pressed her lips together, realizing how she sounded. "Sorry. I was distracted." Clearly. He stood and offered her his hand. After a pause, she took it. His grip was warm and surprisingly steady. He pulled her up with ease, and for a moment they were too close, her unsteady breathing mingling with his. She could smell rain and sweat and the faint scent of laundry detergent, see the fine tremor in his jaw as his adrenaline ebbed. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small compared to the tidal wave inside her. He shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but his eyes checked her over carefully. "Just watch where you're going next time. These streets don't stop for daydreamers." Daydreamers. If only he knew. She almost laughed. The absurdity of worrying about a small scrape while standing in front of the person whose name had just been announced on her phone as dead was too much. "I'm not going to sue you," she said. "You'd be surprised," he muttered, but there was a hint of amusement there now. "Still, wait here." He jogged off toward the store, leaving his bike chained to the pole. Jiyoon stood in the drizzle, pressing her thumb into the watch's cool face. It didn't respond. No light, no ticking, no trace of the violent, impossible moment that had torn her from her desk and dropped her here. It was as silent as it had always been. Maybe, she thought, it only moves once. The idea made her chest squeeze. If this was her only chance, if the wish had spent itself in one desperate act, then every second she stood here wasting time was a second she couldn't get back. But what was she supposed to do? Walk up to him and say, "Hi, I'm from the future, and in 10 years this company will destroy you?" Even in her own head, it sounded insane. He returned quickly, plastic bag swinging from his hand. He held out a small box of bandages and a packet of wet tissues, his expression trying very hard to be casual and failing at the edges. "Here," he said. "They were out of the ones with cartoon characters, so you'll have to settle for boring beige." "Beige is fine," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier now, as if talking about something trivial anchored her in this reality. She sat down on a low wall while he crouched again, tearing open the packet. "I can do it myself," she started, but he shook his head. "You look like you'll fall over again if you bend your knee," he said, concentrating on wiping the dirt from the scrape. "Just sit still. I'm late anyway. A few more minutes won't matter." The tenderness of the gesture, The way he frowned slightly as he dabbed at the wound as if it were something important. It made her throat tighten again. She watched his lashes cast thin shadows on his cheeks, watched a droplet of rain cling to the edge of his jaw. Up close, he didn't look like a star yet. He looked like a boy carrying a dream too heavy for his still-growing shoulders. "Thank you," she said again, softer. "I mean it. You've said that twice," he replied without looking up. "I'm starting to think you're trying to pay me in gratitude instead of buying me coffee." Her lips twitched. "If I buy you coffee, won't you be even later?" He taped the bandage carefully and finally glanced up, a small smile breaking the seriousness of his features. "I'm late whether I want to be or not. Might as well have a good reason." Her heart skipped. He had no idea how many reasons she already owed him. "I don't have much cash," she admitted, patting her pockets out of instinct. Her fingers closed around a few coins and an old transit card. The currency looked slightly different, another quiet confirmation of when she was. "Forget it," he said, standing and slinging his backpack over his shoulder again. "I'm just teasing. Just be careful, okay?" He picked up his bike and walked it a few steps before pausing. "What's your name?" Names had power, her grandmother used to say. Names could tie you to people, to places, to moments in time. She hesitated, then decided there was no point pretending. Jiyoon. He repeated it under his breath, as if testing the sound. Jiyoon SSI. The honorific made something flutter low in her chest. "Well, Jiyoon SSI. Try not to die before you look both ways." "You too," she said before she could stop herself. The words came out sharper than she intended, packed with layers he couldn't possibly understand. He tilted his head. "I'll keep that in mind," he said slowly. Then he gave her a short nod and pushed off, the bicycle wheels cutting a smooth line through the wet street as he pedaled toward the company building. She watched him go until he turned a corner and disappeared from view. The city moved around her as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Students hurried under umbrellas. A bus roared past, splashing water onto the curb. A woman in a red coat laughed into her phone. Life went on, indifferent. Only the watch on her wrist and the tremor in her hands insisted that reality had fractured. She swallowed hard and started walking toward the building. If this really was 10 years earlier, then somewhere inside those glass walls, a younger version of her might be hunched over textbooks, cramming case studies, dreaming of passing her exams. Somewhere in the future, the woman she had been an hour ago was gone. Time, her grandmother had warned, never helps without taking something in return. She didn't know yet what the price would be, but she knew this. She couldn't stand still and let him walk toward the same fate. She had 24 hours. The certainty settled in her chest like a ticking clock she could feel but not hear. A day to understand what would break him. A day to find the first crack in the path that led to that rooftop, that scandal, that headline. A day to change something, anything. She slipped into the lobby, the smell of floor polish and paper and anxiety washing over her. Trainees clustered near the elevators, some stretching, some murmuring lyrics under their breath. Posters on the walls displayed groups she only half remembered, their names like ghosts from an old playlist. She moved through them like a shadow, unseen, half expecting security to stop her. No one did. The watch lay quiet on her wrist, its face ordinary, its glass no longer glowing. As the elevator doors closed around her, her reflection wavered in the mirror panel. Pale, eyes too wide, hair damp from the rain. She barely recognized herself. "I'll save you," she whispered to the empty space. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." Somewhere above, a practice room door would open, and a trainee with tired eyes and stubborn hope would walk in, humming a melody that would one day belong to millions of strangers. She would be there, too, no longer a distant fan behind a screen, but a woman who had already seen the worst version of his future. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open on a floor she knew too well. She stepped out, the weight of invisible hours pressing on her shoulders. Behind her, the seconds she'd left behind in the future continued to spin, unseen, rearranging themselves. Far away, in a timeline she no longer occupied, A news anchor stumbled over a name as the teleprompter text glitched and rewrote itself. A headline shifted by a single word. The echo of sirens faded, replaced by the distant sound of an alarm that never went off. Jiyoon didn't see any of it. For now, all she knew was the feel of the cool hallway floor beneath her shoes, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and the memory of Seo Yujin's hand pulling her up from the asphalt. 24 hours, she thought again, the number pounding in time with her heartbeat. The watch on her wrist, stubbornly silent, seemed to disagree. Changing the headline didn't bring him back. That was the first thing Jiyoon understood when the shock faded and the office lights stopped feeling like interrogation lamps. She sat at her desk with the screen's cold glow on her face, fingers hovering over the mouse, eyes locked on the words that had rearranged themselves while she'd been gone. Top idol Seo Yujin dies in studio fire amid ongoing contract dispute. Studio fire, not rooftop fall. Contract dispute, not mental instability. The photos were different, too. There were images of smoke-stained windows, fire trucks outside a building she recognized, fans pressed against police lines. The anonymous drug source that had turned his death into a moral trial was gone. In its place were phrases she knew too well from the internal documents she handled every day. Breach of contract, conflicting interpretations, unresolved negotiations. It should have felt like proof that she wasn't crazy. Proof that the watch had done something. That she hadn't just imagined a boy's hand pulling her out of traffic and a younger version of Yujin's face inches from hers. Instead, it felt like the universe shrugging. You changed the path, it seemed to say, not the destination. She scrolled down, scanning the article like she was redlining a document. Mention of the company's legal team. Mention of leaked clauses that shifted liability onto the artist. Mention of one executive by name, Kang Dojin, head of artist management and strategic development. The name snagged in her mind like a hook. He hadn't been in the first version of this headline. She was almost sure of it. But that version of the world had been erased the moment the watch's hands started spinning. Her memories were all she had left to compare against. She opened another tab, then another. Search results piled up. Seo Yujin contract dispute timeline. Studio fire investigation. Executive statements. Press conferences. Fan speculation threads. Hashtags. Grainy clips of him leaving meetings with his jaw clenched, shoulders hunched deeper than any stylist recommendation. One name kept surfacing whenever the negotiations were mentioned. Kang Dojin. Younger in the photos than he was in her reality a few days ago, but with the same sharp eyes, the same smooth expression that never quite reached warmth. In one clip he stood beside Yujin at a press conference, hand on the idol's shoulder like a claim. In another, he smiled for cameras while refusing to comment on ongoing legal matters. Jiyoon stared at his face until the pixels blurred. She had seen him around the office, in the elevator, passing through the legal floor on his way to meetings. She'd always been careful not to make eye contact for too long. People like him didn't notice people like her unless something went wrong. Maybe something had already gone wrong, and she just hadn't realized she was part of it yet. Her own name didn't appear anywhere in the articles. Jiyoon didn't exist in the narrative of his death. But she had stamped documents, forwarded emails, adjusted clauses. The machine didn't run on villains alone. It needed 100 small hands to turn. The watch on her wrist lay quiet, the faint red mark it had carved into her skin now fading to a light bruise. It looked ordinary, dead. She knew better now. Sleep didn't come that night. Neither did the next. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw alternate endings stacked like fallen dominoes. Rooftop, pills, fire, contracts. The details changed. The conclusion didn't. By the third morning, she gave up on pretending she could forget the way his hand had felt around her arm, the way his voice had sounded without microphones, the way his eyes had widened when she'd said his full name. She poured coffee she didn't drink and sat at her small kitchen table, the city muted behind rain-fogged glass. The TV murmured in the background, looping the updated story, analysts picking apart the legal implications. She muted it and stared at the watch instead. "You moved once for me," she murmured. Will you do it again? It didn't glow. It didn't twitch. But sometimes decisions come before signs, not after. Her grandmother had also said that. You don't bargain with time. You either step into the river or you don't. Fear did its best to argue. You already changed something. You have no idea what it cost. The first jump had ripped her out of the world without warning. If she called that a jump and not an accident, what would the second one take? A year of her life? 2? Her memories? Or would the price be something quieter? Relationships frayed, opportunities rewritten. A slow erosion of things she didn't know she would miss until they were gone. She curled her fingers around the watch until the edge dug into her palm. If I do nothing, she whispered, he still dies. That's the price I already know. The numbers on the face were still smudged but legible. The hands were frozen in a shape she recognized now not as brokenness but as hesitation. One last thought tried to stop her. What if time only ever bends back to tragedy? What if some ends are fixed? She thought of his music filling her empty apartment, the way his voice had kept her company on nights when she wasn't sure she was more than a background character in her own life. She thought of the way he had gently cleaned her scraped knee, late but not rushing, like a stranger's pain was worth a few more minutes of consequence. If there's even one version where you live, she said softly, I want to find it. She pressed her thumb into the center of the watch. Nothing happened for a heartbeat. Then another. Doubt rose hot and sharp. Maybe it had been a one-time miracle. Maybe she had wasted it already. Send me back to him, she said, the plea escaping in a ragged breath. I mean it. The second hand shuddered. Then, like before, it began to turn. Slower this time, like it was dragging something heavy behind it. The air thickened. The apartment blurred. The sound of the rain inverted. Raindrops rising on the glass instead of falling. The wet trail they left behind erasing itself in neat lines. Her coffee cup slid toward her without moving, liquid inside spinning counterclockwise. Her heart made the same motion. She didn't fight it this time when the floor vanished beneath her. She fell into the space between moments with her eyes open, watching the world unspool in reverse. A song unwrote itself on a radio somewhere. A bus backed through an intersection. A cherry blossom petal lifted off the street and flew back into a tree. Then the rush stopped. She was standing this time, not kneeling, the weight of gravity dropping onto her in a single breath. The sun was higher in the sky than it had been during her last visit to this time. The rain was gone, replaced with a thin spring warmth that smelled faintly of dust and frying oil. She stood across the street from the entertainment company building, its older facade still strangely new in her eyes. Trainees streamed in through the glass doors, gym bags over their shoulders, laughter and nerves buzzing in equal measure. A familiar figure jogged up the sidewalk, hoodie half-zipped, headphones around his neck, lips moving around lyrics only he could hear. She knew that posture now, the slightly hunched shoulders, the determined set of his mouth. Yujin didn't see her at first. He was too focused on whatever song was threading through his mind. When he did glance up and their eyes met across the street, a flicker of recognition jolted through his expression. Surprise, then something like amused disbelief. He raised one hand in a half-wave, half-question. You again? She crossed the street before a car could remind her she still needed to look both ways. Up close, under clear daylight instead of misty rain, he looked even younger. The bruise from their near collision last time had faded from his elbow. The bandage she remembered taping his knee with was gone. Time had moved forward for him as usual. For her it had looped. You're not very good at staying away from dangerous places. Han Jiyoon SSI, he said. There it was again, her name in his mouth. It settled into her like an anchor. You remembered my name, she replied. Of course I did. Not every day a strange woman nearly dies under my bike and tells me I'm going to be a national star. His tone was light, but his eyes searched her face, as if looking for proof that she was something other than a strange blip in his routine. Are you following me, or is this another coincidence? Depends, she said before she could overthink it. Do you believe in coincidences? His brow lifted. You talk like a drama character. You know that? You talk like someone who's late, she countered, gesturing to the building behind him. He checked his watch with a wince. Right? Again. Coach is going to kill me. Again. He pulled one headphone off his ear, studying her one more time. You didn't answer my question. Maybe I'll answer it later, she said. If you don't get kicked out of the program first. Wow, he snorted. Motivational speaker, too. But she saw it, the flash of worry he couldn't quite hide. She knew from the articles she'd read that his trainee years hadn't been easy. Near eliminations. Injuries. Almost debuts that fell apart. The details shifted with each timeline, apparently. The exhaustion underneath the jokes stayed the same. He turned to go, then paused. You coming? She blinked. What? Inside. You said you sort of work here, remember? Unless that was part of the bit. Walking into the building with him wasn't part of any plan she'd come up with. Mostly because she didn't have a plan beyond find the first crack and push. I have some things to check, she said cautiously. Inside. Then let's be late together. He pushed the door open and held it with his foot until she stepped through. The lobby looked the way she remembered it from old photos and hazy memories. Less polished, more hopeful. The walls were cluttered with posters of trainees and B-list acts. The air buzzing with chatter and the faint thump of music from hidden practice rooms. The older version of her, the one who had interned here, might be somewhere in this building right now. The thought made her skin prickle. She kept her head down as they walked, staying close enough to Yujin that anyone who glanced up might assume she was with him. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. It was disturbingly easy to slip through the cracks. A stack of contracts lay on the reception desk, thick as phone books. Her eyes caught on the letterhead, the tiny print at the bottom, the familiar structure of lines designed to protect everyone except the one signing at the bottom. Yujin followed her gaze. We had a meeting about that yesterday, he said, wrinkling his nose. Everyone nods and pretends to understand. Half of us just hope someone else read it properly. Did someone? She asked. Read it properly? He shrugged. They said the company's lawyers checked it. It's standard. No need to worry. Standard. The same word her own boss loved. Standard meant dangerous clauses were buried so deep in habit no one saw them as threats anymore. Her stomach twisted. Can you get a copy? She asked. Of your contract. He stared at her like she'd asked for his bank password. Why? Because one day it might matter that you understand what you signed. She tried to keep her tone casual, but urgency slipped through. And because it's your life. You should know which parts of it you just sold. The word hung between them, heavier than she meant it to be. He inhaled slowly. You really do talk like a drama. But the joke was thinner now. I'll see what I can do. Before she could press, a voice barked his name from down the hall. Seo Yujin. You're late again. He winced. That's my cue to die in a different way. He took a step backward toward the source of the voice, then leaned in slightly. If I get kicked out, I'm blaming the mysterious woman with time traveler eyes. Her breath hitched. He said it lightly, but the words grazed too close to the truth. Then don't get kicked out, she managed. And when you get that contract, promise me you'll read it. What, you'll show up and explain the big words? I might. Then I'll definitely get it, he said. And then he was gone, jogging down the corridor toward a door marked Practice Room 3. She watched it swing shut behind him, the muffled sound of scolding leaking through. She exhaled and turned away, toward the less glamorous part of the building, the hall that led to small meeting rooms, storage, offices. Time pressed on her skin like a hand. 24 hours. Maybe less, depending on when exactly the watch had thrown her here. She found a wall calendar near an office door and checked the date. It was the same day as in her world. 10 years earlier, same page on the calendar, different ink filling the squares. If the rule held, she would be yanked back at the same hour she'd left her apartment. Less time than she wanted. More than some people ever got. The name she'd seen repeating in the articles whispered at the back of her mind. Kang Dojin. She didn't know yet whether he was the match or just the one who held it to the fuse. But his name didn't move when everything else did. That had to mean something. Voices drifted from an open door near the end of the hall. She slowed, letting the sounds separate into words. Too soft. If we don't tighten these clauses now, they'll walk all over us once they debut. You think you're doing them a favor by leaving room to negotiate. I'm telling you, you're not. We're already pushing the line on image rights. Another voice replied, lower, nervous. There's going to be fallout if... Fallout we can manage. The public forgets. The kids don't. Pause. Sign it as is. She edged closer, staying just out of sight. Through the narrow gap in the door, she saw him. Younger than the version she'd seen in recent years, but unmistakable. Kang Dojin leaned against the table, arms crossed. A contract spread in front of him. He wasn't in a suit yet. He wore a fitted shirt and slacks, sleeves rolled up. He looked casual, approachable, like someone who would clap a trainee on the shoulder and ask about their day. His eyes were cold. They're replaceable, he said calmly. Talents like this come in waves. If one drowns, the others swim harder. It's not cruel. It's the business model. Jiyoon's nails dug into her palms. The lawyer sitting across from him hesitated, then picked up a pen and signed. Standard clause, she thought bitterly. The words might not be identical to the ones she'd seen in her own time, but the shape of them was the same. Shift risk downward. Frame it as opportunity. Smile for the camera. She couldn't storm in there and accuse him of murders he hadn't orchestrated yet, in a future that didn't technically exist. But she could do something smaller. A crack, not an explosion. Sometimes that was all you needed to change how the pieces fell. The watch on her wrist ticked once, a faint pulse against her skin, as if approving the thought. A few hours later, she found Yujin in a corner of the practice floor, slumped against a wall outside the room. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. He'd been scolded. She could tell by the way his laughter with other trainees died quickly when he thought no one was looking. Rough day? She asked. He looked up, a crooked grin sliding into place like armor. They didn't kick me out, so I'm calling it a win. I've seen better wins, she said. From where? He tipped his head, studying her. You still haven't told me who you are. Does it matter? It does if you keep showing up and talking like you've seen the last episode of my life already. The words landed like a stone skipping across a lake. Ripples and ripples. She sat down beside him, back against the wall, careful to keep a small distance between them in case the contact did something to the fragile reality she was barely understanding. I work with contracts, she said finally. Not here. Not yet. In 10 years. He snorted. That's a weird way to say you're a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. The distinction still mattered to her, for reasons she didn't want to examine right now. But I read everything they don't expect people like you to read. He fell quiet. A group of trainees jogged past, chattering, then disappeared into a practice room. A muffled beat started up, bass thudding through the floor. If you got a copy of your contract, she said, would you show it to me? You're awfully obsessed with my paperwork, he replied. But there was curiosity there now, not suspicion. Is it more interesting than my singing? Your singing isn't the thing that kills you, she said before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was sharp. He turned his head slowly to look at her. You really believe that, don't you? She swallowed. Yes. He studied her for a long moment, the jokes falling away one by one from his expression. Fine, he said at last. I'll get it. You'll owe me an explanation. I already owe you a lot more than that, she murmured. What? Nothing. He pushed himself to his feet, offering her a hand again. Come on, time traveler. If you're going to haunt me, you might as well hear me sing properly. The nickname pricked at her nerves. Had she been that obvious? But she took his hand anyway. In the practice room, mirrors lined one wall. The floor was scuffed from endless choreography. Speakers in the corner crackled as a track started. He took his place in the middle of the room, the other trainees filtering in, some yawning, some stretching. She stayed near the door, out of the way, arms crossed to hide the tremor in her fingers. When he opened his mouth to sing, the world narrowed. It always did when someone meant what they were saying. His voice wasn't as polished as in the recordings she knew. It was raw, edges unfiled, breath control imperfect. But the emotion was the same. The quiet ache threaded through the notes. The hint of desperation hidden under lyrics about chasing dreams and never giving up. He cracked slightly on a high note, winced, tried again. The coach clicked his tongue. "You're pushing from your throat again. We've gone over this." "I know," Yujin said, frustration darkening his tone. Stop trying to sound like everyone else," Jiyoon said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Heads turned. Her face flushed. The coach blinked. "Who are you?" "No one," she said quickly. He's forcing his high notes. He's lifting his chin. If he keeps doing that, he's gonna blow his voice before he even debuts." Every pair of eyes in the room was on her now. Too late to pretend she wasn't there. Yujin's most of all. "And you know this because?" the coach asked, folding his arms. Old muscle memory moved her tongue. "Because I studied vocal performance," she said. "And because I can hear him trying to be louder instead of more honest." A faint, dangerous silence fell. The coach looked like he might throw her out. Then, after a beat, he shrugged. "Fine. You seem invested. Show him." She hadn't sung in front of anyone in years. Not properly. Her throat tightened in sympathy with Yujin's. She took a slow breath and stepped forward anyway. "Can I borrow your line?" she asked him. He nodded, still caught between annoyance and intrigue. She sang the phrase the way she'd wanted to caution him toward. Less push, more support from lower down, letting the emotion carry the sound instead of sheer force. Her voice wobbled on the first note from nerves, then settled. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "Like that," she said softly. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. People can hear the difference." Yujin stared at her. Something undefinable crossed his face. Like a door had opened somewhere inside him, and he wasn't sure whether to step through. "Again," the coach said to him. "Do it like that." He tried. It wasn't magic. He didn't suddenly transform into the infallible vocalist the public would know one day. But he found a slightly different position for the notes, and the crack didn't split quite as wide this time. His eyes flicked to her in the mirror afterward, as if checking whether she approved. Pride and grief knotted in her chest. This was the part of him she'd fallen for without realizing it. Not the idol, not the image, but the boy who kept trying even when his voice threatened to break. The watch on her wrist pulsed again. The glow was faint, barely visible in the fluorescent lights, but she felt it through her skin. Time was watching. Time was counting. That evening, she found him sitting alone with a thin folder in his hands. He tapped it against his knee when she approached, like it was a bomb he wasn't sure he wanted to hand over. "You really got it," she said. "You're not the only one who knows how to slip past reception," he replied. "Here." He held it out. "You read, then you explain. That's the deal." She flipped through the pages, heart sinking with every line. The words weren't exactly the same as the ones she would see in her own department a decade later, but the bones were there. Clauses about image rights, streaming percentages, behavioral expectations. Termination triggers that leaned hard in one direction. A section about studio usage and liability that made her fingers freeze. "This one," she said, tapping the paragraph. "Don't sign it like this." He frowned. "What's wrong with it?" "If anything happens in a company-owned facility, a studio, a dorm, a rehearsal space, and they can plausibly connect it to you, you take the fall," she said. "All of it. Legal fees, damages, PR cleanup. Even if it wasn't your fault." "Why would that even?" he trailed off. The fire in the article flickered in her mind. Smoke curling out of broken glass. Cameras flashing. Headlines choosing where to aim. "We're not planning to burn the place down," he said weakly. "Accidents happen," she replied. "Sometimes they happen to idols at very convenient times." He swallowed. "So what do I do? Say no and watch them give my spot to someone else?" "Ask them to revise this section," she said. "You don't have to fight the whole contract. Just this. Make them put shared responsibility." Or at least make it vague enough that they can't dump everything on you. And they'll just agree? Probably not, she admitted. But you'll have planted a flag. You'll have shown them you're not completely sleepwalking. He stared at the paragraph for a long time. The watch's ticking grew louder behind her ribs. Finally, he nodded, jaw set. Okay, he said. I'll try. And if they ask why, blame the mysterious woman with time traveler eyes, she said, trying to smile. I think I'm going to be upgrading that nickname soon, he muttered. But there was a warmth in his gaze now that hadn't been there before. She wanted to stay. She wanted to see the meeting where he brought up that clause, wanted to watch the way the executives reacted when a trainee refused to be fully blind. But time had its own schedule. The air around her grew heavy, the edges of the hallway blurring. Her skin prickled the same way it had before the world ripped open. No, not yet. She reached out, closing the folder more firmly in his hands. Yujin, she said, voice urgent. There's a name you need to remember. In 10 years, the world tilted. The watch flared hot. Yujin's eyes widened as he saw the light bleeding out from under her sleeve. Without thinking, he grabbed her wrist. What is that? He demanded. The hallway stretched, the sound of his voice warping, slowing. She felt the pull at her spine, the irresistible drag backward. Next time, he said, the words dragging through molasses-thick air as he tightened his grip. Next time, tell me everything. Her fingers slipped from his. The light swallowed the scene. The folder, the hallway. His face caught between fear and determination. Then she was alone with the ticking again. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her apartment. The coffee she'd left on the table now cold and untouched. The TV droned softly. She didn't need to turn up the volume to know which story it was telling. She grabbed her phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and searched his name. The results that appeared were not the ones she'd read that morning. The studio fire was still there, but the timeline was different. Articles about a long, bitter contract negotiation surfaced. Clips of Yujin leaving buildings with a lawyer at his side. Mentions of a delayed comeback. Of rumors that he'd been the one to challenge unfair clauses. Headlines praised his bravery in standing up to the company. Other voices called him difficult. The final article hit like a fist. Top idol Seo Yujin dies in car accident after meeting with prosecutors over industry corruption. No rooftop, no fire, same ending. The watch on her wrist had a thin crack in the glass now, running from the edge to the center like a hairline fracture in ice. It hadn't been there before. She traced it with her thumb, feeling the slight ridge. Time was bending. So was she. Somewhere 10 years behind her. A boy who had not yet debuted held a folder with slightly different words in it, and remembered the way a woman had vanished in front of him, leaving only heat and questions behind. Somewhere in every version of the future she'd seen so far, Seo Yujin still didn't make it out alive. The river of his life kept taking him to the same shore, no matter how many small stones she threw in to change the current. Next time, he had said, gripping her wrist as time tried to tear her away. Tell me everything. If there was a next time, she would have to decide how much truth a person could carry without breaking. The watch lay against her skin, cracked but still ticking underneath. It hadn't stopped. Not yet. The watch didn't stop ticking after the third headline. That was the cruelest part. It kept going, steady and indifferent, even as every version of Seo Yujin's future ended in the same black curtain. Jiyoon sat on the edge of her bed with the phone still in her hand, thumb hovering over the last article she'd opened. Top idol Seo Yujin dies in car accident after meeting with prosecutors over industry corruption. Studio fire, rooftop scandal, pills, lawsuits. Each timeline rearranged the props, changed the stage, dressed the tragedy in a different costume. The conclusion didn't flinch. Heat throbbed along the thin crack in the watch's glass, a faint ache like a healing wound. She pressed her thumb against it and winced. Her reflection in the dark window looked worse than she remembered. Eyes smudged with sleepless nights, skin too pale except for 2 high spots of color in her cheeks. On the muted TV, a commentator gestured at a timeline graphic, pointing out key moments in Yujin's decision to stand up against corruption. They said his name like he'd chosen martyrdom. They said it like bravery and grief were the same thing. She unmuted the sound in a burst of irritation. Was seen as difficult by some executives, the woman was saying, but to many he became a symbol of resistance. Fans have started referring to him as the voice they couldn't silence. The phrase lodged in her chest. Voice they couldn't silence. They had, though, not in the courtroom or the studio, but on a rainy road with slick asphalt and brake lights that didn't shine long enough. Jiyoon's head throbbed. She closed her eyes, and memories shuffled behind her lids in a way that made her stomach turn. In one memory, he died under a headline about drugs. In another, flames ate the edges of a building. In the latest, twisted metal and emergency blankets. They overlapped, blurred. For a split second, she couldn't tell which one had actually happened. A sharp pain speared behind her eyes. She clutched her head and sucked in a breath. The room tilted. The TV image doubled, then snapped into focus again. She'd figured out one thing. Time did not like being pushed. Her phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. Did you hear? They're saying new evidence came from inside legal. Scary that something like that was buried all this time. Makes you wonder what else is hiding in our files, right? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then dropped. She didn't want to know what version of her work history this person remembered. In this timeline, what had she done? How many clauses had she adjusted? Which versions of his contracts had passed through her hands? Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too full of unseen threads tugging at her from every direction. She got up, dizzy, and opened the window for fresh air. The night breeze was cool but did nothing to clear the fog in her mind. Down on the street, a car passed, music leaking out the window, one of his songs. The chorus hit like a punch. She watched the taillights recede, twin red dots sliding toward a bend in the road. The image overlapped with a photo from the article. Crumpled metal, glass, a long skid mark. Her stomach churned. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter. If I stop, she whispered into the empty room, you still die. If I keep going, I might be cutting pieces off my own life. What do I do, Yujin? The watch gave no answer. It just sat there, cracked and patient, as if amused by her sudden desire to negotiate. Her grandmother's voice rose up from memory, calm and unyielding. Time is greedy. It never helps without taking something in return. But how much? She whispered back. How much do you want? She didn't sleep that night either. When she did finally drift off near dawn, she sank into a dream so vivid it felt like another timeline. She stood in her grandmother's old house, the one that had been sold years ago. The air smelled like dried herbs and kimchi and the faint dust of old books. Sunlight spilled across the low table where a teapot sat, steam curling upward. On the far side of the room, her grandmother sat on a cushion, hands folded in her lap. The watch lay between them, gleaming new and unbroken. You look tired, the old woman said mildly. You've been walking too long without checking where you're going. It's not a walk, Jiyoon said, her voice breaking. It's more like drowning, but backwards. Her grandmother chuckled. Dramatic, this one. Then her gaze sharpened. You used it. Jiyoon's throat tightened. Twice. The old woman picked up the watch, turning it between her fingers as if examining fruit at a market. Shows. Halmiani, Jiyoon said. What is it taking? Time, she replied simply. What else can it take? Mine, ours, yours, his, theirs. Her grandmother shrugged. Time is tangled. You pull on one thread, others move. But the watch is particular. She met Jiyoon's eyes, the cloudy pupils suddenly sharp as glass. It only counts what you offer. I didn't offer anything, Jiyoon said, panic spiking. Not on purpose. Ah, her grandmother said softly. You wished with your whole heart and thought that was free? Jiyoon's vision blurred. If I knew the price, you'd still have done it, the old woman said, not unkindly. Don't lie to yourself. You're not that kind of coward. Heat crept up Jiyoon's neck. Then tell me, Tell me what I'm giving up. Her grandmother set the watch down on the table between them. Uncracked here, its face was clear, the hands ticking steadily. Every time you go back, you offer up a portion of your own future, she said. Not years in a neat number. Moments. Possibilities. Threads. I don't understand, Jiyoon whispered. You might have met someone in 10 years who would have changed your life, her grandmother said calmly. A bus you would have caught. A song you would have heard. A small kindness you would have given or received. Now perhaps you won't. You trade all the futures you'll never know for one boy's chance to have his. The room felt cold despite the sunlight. And him? Jiyoon asked. Is his death fixed? Is there always something waiting to kill him? Her grandmother's hands stilled. For the first time, regret flickered across the old woman's features. Some people, she said slowly, are born at the center of larger storms. The world decides to spin around them. That kind of gravity is dangerous. The watch can bend some things, but a fixed ending is like a river that carved its path long before you were born. So I can't save him. The words tasted like ash. I didn't say that, her grandmother chided. Rivers flood. Rivers dry. Rivers get dammed and redirected. But it's not easy to overturn a fixed death. Her eyes grew distant. Someone else has to be willing to lose something of equal weight. Like what? Like their place in the story, the old woman said softly. Like their right to be remembered in it. Fear slid icy fingers along Jiyoon's spine. You mean, if I save him, he might never know I existed? That's one way the balance might choose to settle, her grandmother said. Or maybe you'll live shorter, or lonelier, or in a world where your greatest joys never happen. She smiled sadly. Time is greedy, yes, but it is also creative. Tears burned behind Jiyoon's eyes. That's not fair. It isn't, her grandmother agreed. But fairness was never part of the bargain. You asked to rewind. You did not ask for fairness. The watch between them ticked louder. Do you regret it? Jiyoon whispered. Her grandmother's gaze softened. Every choice worth making comes with some regret, she said. The question is, can you live with the version of yourself who didn't try? The room darkened at the edges. The steam from the teapot twisted backward, flowing back into the spout. The watch's glass cracked down the middle. Halmione! She woke with her hand already pressed to the watch, breath shallow, heart racing. The house was gone. The sunlight, the teapot. But the crack in the glass was real, just as she'd seen it in the dream. A hairline fissure splitting the face in two. Her head pounded. When she swung her legs off the bed, the floor tilted again. She stumbled to the bathroom and blinked at herself in the mirror. A thin line of blood trickled from one nostril. Great, she muttered. We're doing the full drama package now. She washed her face and watched the water swirl pink, then clear. The nosebleed stopped quickly, but the warning stayed. Time always asks for payment. She stared at the watch for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and searched his name again. This time, she went beyond the death and the accident. She dug into fan accounts, behind-the-scenes snippets, old interviews. In this version of the future, Seo Yujin was different too. Not in his core, the warmth in his eyes, the way he laughed, the way he bowed a little deeper than necessary to staff were all the same. But the edges had changed. He was sharper in interviews, less ready to smile at questions about the company. He made a comment once about reading every line of his contracts now, and fans had turned it into a meme. He'd become a symbol, not just of talent but of resistance. Articles praised his unusual awareness of industry power dynamics. Some said he was difficult. Others called him brave. She found a clip of him on a talk show from about a year before the accident. The host joked, "You're not afraid your company will be mad at you for speaking so frankly?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "If I'm afraid of telling the truth," he said, "what's the point of having a voice?" The audience clapped. The host laughed. The segment moved on. Jiyoon watched that line on loop until her fingers went numb. She'd planted that seed. Sitting with him on the practice room floor, pushing him to read what he signed, telling him not to assume the stipulations were in his favor. The river kept changing its curves. He kept ending up in the same sea. She knew what she had to do before she admitted it to herself. The thought sat heavy in her chest, quietly undeniable. Next time, tell me everything. If there was a next time, there was no point in half measures. Warnings without context were just new ways to twist fate's path into more creative shapes. She wiped her face, sat back on the bed, and stared at the watch. "I'll pay," she said softly. "Whatever it costs. Just give me one more chance." The second hand didn't spin wildly this time. It slid backward slowly, each tick deliberate, like a judge signing a sentence line by line. The air pressed around her, thick and expectant. Her heart clenched. She thought of her grandmother's question. Can you live with the version of yourself who didn't try? No, she thought. I already met her. She's the one who sat at a desk and watched you die once. I can't go back to being her. The world folded. When she blinked her eyes open, she was standing under an overcast sky, the air heavy with the smell of rain and wet pavement. Sounds layered around her. Car engines, hurried footsteps, a distant siren. She knew this street. It was the one outside the building where he'd met the prosecutors. She'd seen it in photos, in news clips, in fan-captured shaky footage. The crosswalk, the intersection, the bend where the car hadn't made the turn in time. Her pulse spiked. A black car idled near the curb. A few meters away, paparazzi loitered with cameras disguised in tote bags and jackets. Rain speckled the ground, not heavy yet, but enough to slick the road with a treacherous sheen. Across the street, the building's doors opened. He stepped out with a small group, lawyers, staff, a couple of men she recognized from the articles as investigators. He wore a dark coat over a simple shirt, his hair pushed back. No stage makeup, no lights, just the raw version the world rarely saw. When he lifted his face to the sky for a second, feeling the rain, her breath caught. 10 years, 2 jumps, 3 deaths. He looked older now than the last time she'd stood in front of him. Lines of strain bracketed his mouth. But it was him. It was always him. She moved before she could think, slipping between parked cars to get closer. Time gripped her ankles with every step, like wading through water. "Yujin," she called. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No recognition, just a man frowning slightly at a stranger. Then his eyes widened. It was small, a flicker, a flash, but it was there. Déjà vu. A hint of something his conscious mind couldn't place. But his bones remembered. Security moved forward, reflexively forming a barrier. She stepped up anyway, rain dampening her hair, soaking into her coat. "You can't be here," one guard said sharply. "Step back, miss." "I need to talk to him," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "We don't take direct questions," the manager snapped. "Send it through the agency if you—" "It's okay," Yujin said suddenly. His voice cut through the chatter. "1 minute," the manager protested. "We're already behind schedule and the reporters—" "1 minute," he repeated, a quiet steel entering his tone. "Alone." They hesitated. Then, grudgingly, they stepped back just enough to let her approach him near the edge of the curb. The traffic light at the intersection flipped from red to green. Cars began to slide through the crossing, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the determination in the set of his shoulders. He'd learned how to carry the weight of a symbol. It didn't sit lightly. "Have we met?" he asked. The question cut deeper than she expected. "Yes," she said. "But you don't remember. Not all of it." His gaze flicked to her wrist. The watch lay there, crack glinting faintly. Something in his expression tightened, as if a dream he'd had too many times suddenly floated to the surface. "You're the one from my dreams," he said slowly. "The girl who keeps telling me not to sign things I don't understand." Tears pricked her eyes. "At least your subconscious listened." A corner of his mouth lifted, faded quickly. "Are you real? Real enough that I'm standing in the rain to tell you this," she said. "You can't get in that car." His brow furrowed. "What?" Don't get in that car, she repeated. Take a different route, different driver, different time. I don't care. Just don't drive away from this building today. Suspicion warred with instinct in his gaze. Is this about the threats? Threats? She echoed, alarmed. He exhaled, looking past her toward the waiting press, the hunched shoulders under umbrellas. You show up in my life the same week I agree to cooperate with prosecutors about industry corruption and tell me not to get in cars, he said. Of course this is about the threats. Her stomach clenched. The river was carving itself openly now. Yujin, she said quietly, you die in that car today. His eyes snapped back to hers. Not a joke now. Not vague. She'd pushed the words into solid form. There was no pulling them back. Car accident, she continued, forcing the sentence out past her own terror. Wet road. Bend in the highway. Driver loses control. That's what the news says. That's what the official report says. But the timing is too neat. Right after you give them what they need. How do you know that? He asked. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. Are you with them? If I were, would I be telling you to skip your ride? She shot back, hurt flaring. He flinched. Then how? Because I've seen it, she whispered. I've seen 3 different ways the world tries to break you. And this is the one you're standing in front of right now. The traffic light changed again. The manager called his name impatiently. Cameras clicked and whirred as reporters angled for a better shot of the whispered conversation. I met you when you were a trainee, she said. Words tumbling now, fueled by fear and the ticking she could feel vibrating in her bones. I almost got hit by your bike. You bought me a bandage. You listened when I told you to read your contract. You fought them on a clause they used to bury accidents. You lived through a fire you were supposed to die in. You turned into the kind of artist who tells the truth even when it hurts you. His stare was unblinking. His chest rose and fell quickly. I don't remember any of that. You remember enough that you've been dreaming about me, she said. You remember enough that you fought them on those contracts without knowing why you started caring about legal language. He swallowed. His voice lowered. Who are you? The girl who keeps asking time to rewrite your death, she said simply, and running out of ways to pay for it. A horn blared. One of the cars at the front of the line revved impatiently. Rain thickened, drops fattening, dotting his coat. Don't get in that car, she said again. Please. He stared at the waiting vehicle, at the driver inside checking his watch, at the manager signaling that they needed to move. Then he looked back at her. If I don't go, he said, they'll say I'm paranoid, difficult, afraid. You're allowed to be afraid, she whispered. You don't owe them your life for the truth. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Or maybe it was something else. Tell me one thing, he said. In any of those other versions you've seen, do I ever get to just be a singer? Not a symbol, not a scandal, just someone who sings. Her vision blurred. There isn't enough of you left in those endings for me to tell, she said. So I'm trying to find the one where there is. Wind gusted between them, snapping an umbrella inside out down the sidewalk. The manager swore under his breath and hurried forward. Yujin, we have to go. He glanced over his shoulder. Something settled in his face. A choice. No, he said quietly. We don't. The manager blinked. Excuse me? I'm not getting in that car, Yujin said. More loudly this time. We'll reschedule. Or do it over video. Or I'll walk home. I don't care. I'm not riding today. You can't just, there's a schedule and the prosecutors. They can wait, he cut in. If they want my testimony, they can accommodate my safety. His gaze never left Jiyoon's. A murmur rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. The paparazzi lifted their cameras higher, sensing something brewing. The manager hissed something under his breath about optics and obligations. For the first time since she'd arrived in this version of the day, Jiyoon let herself feel a thin, trembling thread of hope. Then the watch burned. It felt like someone had pressed a branding iron to her skin. She gasped, clutching her wrist. The crack in the glass flared with white light, spreading like a spiderweb. No, not yet. Her knees buckled. The sidewalk seemed to tilt beneath her. Through the roar in her ears, she dimly heard him shout her name. Had she told him her name this time? And lunge forward to catch her. His hand closed around her arm, the contact searing. For a second, just one, the light pulled at both of them. She saw flashes. Him in a hospital bed, alive but unconscious. Him on stage 10 years from now, singing a song he hadn't written yet. Him laughing in a kitchen, flour on his cheek. Him sitting alone with a guitar, humming something soft and raw. Then the watch made its choice. The light snapped back into her alone. His grip broke. She fell backward, away from his outstretched hand, into the howling white space between seconds. She woke to hospital white. The ceiling above her was too bright, the light too cold. Machines beeped in a slow, steady rhythm at her side. Her arm ached from an 4-needle. The antiseptic smell clawed at her nose. For a moment, panic surged. Had she been too late? Had the car still crashed? Had she died instead? She turned her head with effort. On the bedside table, the watch lay cracked and dark. It didn't tick. It didn't glow. Its face was frozen at the exact minute she'd collapsed on the street. Her throat was dry. "Water," she croaked. A nurse appeared, adjusting her drip, holding a straw to her lips. "You're awake," the woman said, relief softening her features. "Good. You gave us a scare. What happened?" "You fainted near the courthouse," the nurse said. "Stress, dehydration, something like that. You're lucky someone caught you before you hit the pavement too hard." Courthouse, not prosecutor's office. Details shifted again, even here. Did anyone else? Jiyoon swallowed, fighting the dryness. Seo Yujin. Was he in an accident? The nurse gave her a look that was a mix of surprise and something like pity. "You must have hit your head harder than we thought," she said gently. "There's nothing about him on the news right now except his world tour." "World tour?" Her heart stuttered. "He's alive." "As far as I know, yes," the nurse replied. "You must really be a fan." She left before Jiyoon could formulate a response. Hands trembling, Jiyoon reached for her phone on the bedside table. Notifications flooded the screen, but she bypassed them all and searched his name. The results that came up were different again. No scandal headlines on the first page. No tragic car accident, no studio fire. Articles about a massive global tour, a charity foundation he'd started to support trainees' mental health, a collaboration with other artists to push for fairer contracts in the industry. There were mentions of legal reform, of quiet lobbying, of testimony given behind closed doors. But the focus was on his work, his music, the causes he supported. She scrolled faster, heart racing, ready for the familiar punch of a death article. It didn't come. There was a clip from a recent interview. Hands shaking, she tapped it. He sat on a studio couch, hair styled casually, a soft sweater making him look more like the boy who'd bought her bandages than the untouchable star he'd become in other timelines. The host asked him a question about fear. "Was there ever a moment?" The host said, "When you thought, if I keep doing this, it might cost me my life?" Yujin considered for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I think anyone who tells the truth in a system built on silence has that thought at some point," he said. "But I had a reminder early on that my life wasn't something I was allowed to spend carelessly." "A reminder?" He nodded slowly, eyes going unfocused, as if looking at something just past the camera. "It'll sound strange," he warned, "but for a long time I had this recurring dream. There was this girl who kept showing up at strange moments, telling me to read what I signed, telling me not to get in certain cars, telling me my voice mattered more than the people who wanted to use it." The host chuckled. "A guardian angel? Maybe," he said, "or maybe just my own conscience trying to grow a spine." His smile softened. "Either way, I decided a long time ago that if I was going to risk anything, I'd rather risk my reputation than my life." "Do you think you'll ever meet her?" the host teased. "This dream girl." Yujin's gaze dropped for a moment, something unreadable flickering there. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I feel like I already did, but It's like remembering a scene from a drama I watched when I was too young. The feeling stays. The details don't. The host moved on to another question. The audience laughed at a joke. The clip ended. Jiyoon lay back against the pillow, tears sliding silently into her hairline. He was alive. The river had changed its course. The watch on the table was dead now. No ticking, no glow, just a cracked face and a worn strap. Whatever it had been, whatever bargain it had made with her heart, it was finished. She closed her eyes and tried to trace the edges of her own life in this new version of the world. Memories shuffled like cards. Some felt solid. Her job, her apartment, the lonely evenings with his music. Others frayed at the edges when she reached for them. Had she ever gone to music school in this timeline? Had she ever sat in that practice room correcting his high notes? In one memory, she had. In another, she had never picked up a microphone in front of anyone. The two versions lay over each other, indistinct. Time had taken its payment in quiet erasures. Her phone buzzed with a new notification. A news alert. Seo Yujin to hold free fan concert benefiting trainee mental health fund. "I guess you found your version," she whispered into the sterile air. If he heard, if some small thread of connection still ran between them, she didn't know. A few days later, discharged with a vague warning about stress and overwork-induced fainting, she walked past a billboard in the city center. His face looked down from the advertisement, smiling, relaxed, eyes crinkling at the corners. Concert dates lined the bottom of the poster. She almost kept walking. Instead, she stopped and stared, letting the crowd flow around her. "You're welcome," she murmured, a sad little smile tugging at her mouth. "Even if you never know why you got to keep breathing." As she turned away, she caught her reflection in the glass. For a split second, it looked like someone else. Someone who had never worn a stage dress, never played piano in a dim recital hall, never stood in a practice room correcting a trainee's posture. Then it was just her again. The price? She thought, touching the ghost of the watch's weight on her bare wrist. It always comes due. Somewhere, in a version of the past only she remembered, a girl with rain-soaked hair nearly stepped into traffic and was yanked back by a boy on a bike. In this present, the boy was a man who loved his life enough to avoid certain cars and read every line of his contracts. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined. It wasn't fully happy. It wasn't fully hers. But he was alive. For now, that was enough. The watch did not tick. Time moved on without her permission, the way it always had, the way it always would. She took a breath and stepped into it. The spring he finally came home. The city was covered in petals and posters with his face on them. 3 years had passed since the day Jiyoon woke up in a hospital bed with a dead watch and a living idol somewhere out there in a world that no longer remembered how close it had come to losing him. Time had kept its side of the bargain with an almost petty thoroughness. At first, the changes in her own life were small enough to ignore. A missed memory here, an extra scar there. She tried to recall the name of an old professor and find only static. A stranger would wave at her on the street like they knew her from somewhere she couldn't place. Then the bigger gaps appeared. One day she opened a dusty box in her closet and found concert ticket stubs for a show she didn't remember attending. Another day she stumbled while clearing old emails in her work account and realized an entire case file was gone. Not from the archive, but from her memory alone. She was still a legal assistant at the entertainment company, but the department had changed. New policies, new trainings about artist welfare and transparent contracts. A task force on mental health access for trainees. Some days it felt like stepping into an alternate version of a familiar room. The furniture in the same place, the air different. On the wall outside their office, a framed photograph had appeared last year. It showed a group of executives and artists at a charity gala. In the center, smiling politely for the camera, stood Seo Yujin. The plaque beneath mentioned a foundation for trainee mental health and legal support. The company had donated, so had Yujin's own organization. She had wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. You turned into a storm they had to respect, she thought, pausing in front of the frame that first week. Good. The watch sat in her top drawer, wrapped in a handkerchief. She told herself she kept it there because it was a family heirloom, not because she was afraid of what looking at it too long might trigger. It no longer ticked. Sometimes, late at night, half asleep at her kitchen table, she'd think she heard a faint sound from that drawer. When she checked, it was always just her own pulse in her ears. On a Tuesday afternoon, her inbox pinged with a company-wide announcement. Internal joint free concert with Seo Yujin Foundation, staff invitation. She stared at the subject line for a long time before clicking. The message was formal, full of bland wording about collaboration, public image, and community outreach. But one sentence near the bottom snagged her breath. All employees are welcome to attend on their own time. Her cursor hovered over the RSVP button until it timed out and the screen went dim. That night, she opened the drawer and unwrapped the watch. The crack in the glass caught the kitchen light, splitting it into two crooked halves. "You did it," she said quietly to the broken thing. "You got your miracle. He's alive. He's okay." Her reflection in the metal was warped, older than she felt, younger than she remembered. "Am I?" she added, half a joke, half a question. The watch, of course, said nothing. The evening of the concert, the sky threatened rain again. Thin clouds smeared over the city, like someone had dragged a wet brush across a painting. The outdoor venue was in a park by the river, its small stage framed by strings of lights and banners for the foundation. She almost didn't go. She walked there slowly instead of taking the subway, letting the city's noise wash over her. Couples holding hands, kids tugging at parents' sleeves, teenagers in matching fan shirts. She could have turned back at any corner. At the park entrance, volunteers handed out simple paper wristbands for general admission. She slipped one on automatically. No VIP badge, no staff laminate, just a piece of colored paper that declared her one of hundreds. The crowd gathered in front of the stage was smaller than the stadium oceans he could have commanded, but that seemed intentional. The screens on either side of the stage displayed gentle reminders about resources for stress, hotlines, and counseling options for trainees and young fans. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a kind of gathering. She found a spot near the back, where she could see without being seen. Flowering trees swayed in the breeze, petals drifting like slow-motion snow. The river hummed in the distance. A faint drizzle began, umbrellas blooming open like cautious flowers. When the lights dimmed, a murmur rolled through the crowd. Then he walked out. Time did a strange double-take in her chest. He looked both exactly the same and completely new. Older than the trainee on the bicycle. Softer around the eyes than the man in the scandal timelines she still carried as scars. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, a guitar slung across his body. No backup dancers. No pyrotechnics. Just him and a microphone. "Thank you for coming," he said, and the sound of his unamplified voice reached them through the night before the speakers caught up. "Tonight's a little different from my usual concerts. If you came here for flawless high notes and fancy lights, I'm going to disappoint you." The crowd laughed, warm and easy. "I wanted to make something small," he continued, "closer, so we can remember why we started making music in the first place. Before contracts, before numbers." His gaze swept over the sea of faces. For a moment, as he looked toward the back, it snagged on her. Or she imagined it did. Her heart tripped anyway. He started with an older song, one that existed in every version of his life she'd seen. The arrangement was stripped back, more fragile. When he reached the chorus, his voice caught for just a second, not on a technical flaw but on a feeling. The crowd sang with him, filling the space where his breath faltered. "You're not alone," she thought, hands fisted in her pockets. "You never were, even when they tried to convince you otherwise." Between songs, he spoke about fear and about asking for help. He didn't name names or describe incidents. He didn't have to. "People like me are trained to pretend we're nothing but the shiny parts," he said, fingers idly picking at guitar strings. "But the cracks are where the light gets in. I don't say that to be poetic. I say it because if I hadn't broken down a few times, I wouldn't have been forced to ask, 'Do I want to die for this?'" Silence fell, heavy and attentive. "And Someone near the front called out, half joking. "Do you?" The crowd chuckled nervously. He smiled, small and real. "No," he said simply. "I don't. Not anymore." Applause broke out, not wild but fierce in its own way. Her eyes stung. In the versions of his life she'd watched from the wrong side of a screen, he never got to say that sentence out loud. During the last song, the drizzle thickened. Umbrellas went up. A few stubborn fans in plastic ponchos danced anyway, waving light sticks that cast soft colors on wet faces. He finished with a quieter track, one she didn't recognize. New then, born in a timeline she hadn't visited. The lyrics were about walking through a storm with someone whose name you never learn. About a hand that catches you once and then disappears. She laughed under her breath, a wet, shaky sound. "Show off," she murmured. "You wrote us a metaphor." When the concert ended, people began to disperse slowly, reluctant to leave. Volunteers collected discarded flyers and tossed rain-damp tissues into bags. The stage crew moved with practiced efficiency, coiling cables, covering equipment. Jiyoon stayed where she was until most of the crowd had thinned, the ache in her legs reminding her she'd been standing for hours. The sky had decided against a full rainstorm. The drizzle faded, leaving the world slick and glowing under streetlights. She turned to go and nearly walked straight into a security barrier. "Sorry," she muttered, stepping aside. "No problem, miss," one of the staffers said. "If you're heading out, this side exit is quicker." He pointed down a narrower path along the edge of the park, lined with trees and a low railing. It curved behind the stage area toward a quieter street. Quicker sounded good. Her body felt heavier than usual. Not tired exactly, just used. The way her voice had felt after long recital days at school. In a life she now remembered as blurry photographs instead of solid film. She took the side path. The chatter and leftover music faded behind her. The night air was cooler here, touched with river breeze. A few meters ahead, the path bent around a cluster of bushes. Voices drifted from beyond the curve. "Are you sure?" a man was saying. "We can have the car brought around to the other." "It's a 3-minute walk," another voice replied, familiar enough to make her ribs tighten. "If I can sing for 2 hours, I can manage that." She stopped. Instinct told her to turn back, to avoid whatever scene waited around the bend. She had already seen him tonight, heard him, confirmed with her own eyes that he was breathing and laughing and complaining about high notes. She owed time nothing more. Her feet didn't listen. She rounded the corner. He stood by a lamppost, coat thrown over one arm, a towel around his neck. 2 staff members hovered nearby, one juggling a tablet and a phone, the other with a walkie-talkie. The security detail scanned the path ahead, relaxed but alert. Over the railing, the river flowed slow and dark, reflecting the city in broken streaks of light. For a heartbeat, no one noticed her. She could still back away. Then one of the staffers glanced up, caught sight of her, and offered a reflexive polite smile before going back to his devices. No alarm, no warning, just another passerby. Yujin followed his colleague's line of sight. His gaze slid over her, moved on, then snapped back. It was subtle, a hesitation, a faint narrowing of his eyes, like a note slightly off-key that only someone who really listened would catch. She froze. Up close, without stage lights and distance, she could see the changes in him more clearly. Tiny lines at the corners of his eyes from laughing and squinting into spotlights. A small scar near his temple she'd never seen in photos, hidden usually by styled hair. The kind of detail you only noticed when you were standing within arm's reach. "Evening," he said, polite and neutral. The tone of someone greeting a fan who had accidentally wandered into a semi-private area. "Evening," she echoed. Her voice sounded thin. "You enjoyed the show?" he asked. He didn't have to. He could have nodded and kept walking. But something in his expression suggested he was buying time with small talk until his brain caught up with whatever instinct had stalled his feet. "It was..." She searched for the right word and landed on the simplest one. "Honest." Something eased in his shoulders. "That's the best review I could ask for," he said lightly. One of the staffers murmured his name, a question. He lifted a hand slightly, a gesture that said, "Just a moment." His attention returned to her, more focused now. His gaze dropped, quickly, almost involuntarily, to her bare wrist, then back up. "You're not wearing it," he said before he could stop himself. She blinked. "Wearing what?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, a hint of frustration in his tone. "That's the problem." She almost laughed. Of course. Time hadn't let him keep the details. That would have broken the terms of their uneven bargain. For a mad second, she imagined telling him everything right there on the damp path. The watch, the deaths, the loops, the choices. The way his hand had grabbed her arm in one timeline and almost been pulled with her into the white space between heartbeats. Instead, she drew a quiet breath and chose the part of the truth that mattered most. "You changed a lot of lives," she said. "Not just with your music. With everything you did around it." He tilted his head, skeptically amused. "Including yours?" "Yes," she said, before she could talk herself out of it. "Especially mine." His eyes searched her face, as if trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The river murmured. Far off, the stage speakers crackled with some technician's test sound. "I don't remember where I've seen you," he said slowly. "But it feels like I should." She swallowed. "That's okay," she managed. "You don't have to." He studied her for another moment, something unspoken moving behind his gaze. Then he offered a small, rueful smile. "Still," he said, "if I ever almost get hit by a bicycle again, I'll know who to blame." The joke landed between them like a thrown pebble, sending out ripples of déjà vu. Her vision blurred for a second. "Look both ways," she replied softly. The staffer with the tablet tapped his watch. "We really have to go, Hyung. Right?" Yujin said, stepping back. He gave her one last searching look, like he wanted to memorize her just in case she slipped into his dreams again. "Get home safe." "You too," she repeated. He walked away, flanked but not swallowed by his small entourage, coat over his arm, towel around his neck, humming a melody under his breath. At the corner, he hesitated for half a second before choosing the pedestrian crossing instead of the car idling at the curb. Just walking, she thought, chest tight, like someone who wants to keep being alive. She stayed by the railing until he disappeared from view, until the river's quiet hiss was the loudest sound again. Later that year, she visited her parents in the small town where she'd grown up. Her mother handed her a small box from the top of an old wardrobe. "I found this in your grandmother's things," she said. "You left it here last time." Inside, nestled in tissue, lay the watch. For a moment, confusion flickered. Hadn't she kept it in her apartment drawer? Then she remembered the way her memories had been shuffled like cards. In this version of her life, maybe she'd done things differently. Maybe she'd tucked it away here, trying to forget. Her young niece peered over the edge of the box, eyes wide. "Halmiani's watch," the girl whispered. "It looks like something from a fairy tale." Jiyoon smiled faintly. "It kind of is. Does it still work?" the child asked. Jiyoon lifted it carefully. The crack was still there, but the face looked less tired somehow. The hands were frozen at some in-between time. "No," she said. "Not the way it used to." "What did it do?" She hesitated. Truth and stories sat side by side in her mouth. "It listens to wishes," she said at last. "But it only moves for the ones you really mean." Her niece's eyes shone. "Can I make a wish?" "No," Jiyoon said gently, then softened the refusal with a smile. "Not yet. You have plenty of time without borrowing any strange magic. Live that first." She closed the box and slid it back toward the shelf, for a moment. Then she changed her mind, taking the watch out and looping the worn strap through its own buckle so it formed a loose circle. She placed it on the windowsill instead, where the afternoon light could catch it. Outside, in the neighbor's yard, a boy was fumbling through chords on a guitar, fingers clumsy but determined. Somewhere far away, in a different city, a man stood in a recording studio, laughing with his band between takes. Time flowed, indifferent and unremarkable. People lived. Some days that was the quietest miracle of all. That night, as she lay in her childhood bed listening to the sound of rain starting on the roof, Jiyoon turned onto her side and looked at the watch on the sill. For just a second, she thought she saw the second hand twitch. "Don't," she whispered. "We're done, you and I." The watch stayed still. In the distance, almost too faint to hear, a song floated from a neighbor's radio, one of his. She let herself imagine, for one selfish heartbeat, a world where she might have been in the front row of his concerts with a backstage pass that was more than a fan's lottery win. A world where he looked at her on purpose, not just by coincidence. Then she let the image go. He was alive. That was the world she'd paid for. She closed her eyes and listened to the rain and the music. Between one breath and the next, sleep slipped up to meet her, soft and ordinary. No flashing light, no spinning hands, no white space between moments. For the first time in a long time, she was grateful for how boring that felt. Somewhere, in a city lit up like a stage, Seo Yujin stood at a window after another long day, staring out at the night. A strange heaviness settled over him, the kind that arrived sometimes when the applause faded and the makeup was wiped away. He didn't know why he suddenly thought of rain, and bicycles, and a girl on a sidewalk who always seemed to be just out of reach in his dreams. "Thank you," he said softly to the glass, not sure who he was addressing. No one answered. But the lights of the city blinked back at him, and for reasons he couldn't explain, the loneliness in his chest eased a little. He turned away, humming a new melody, already thinking of the next song, the next stage, the next morning. The river of his life flowed forward, no longer rushing toward an unseen cliff. Behind him, on a bedside table, a digital clock ticked over to the next minute. The tiny, ordinary movement of plastic and light went unnoticed. Time went on, and somewhere between its unremarkable seconds, a fixed death lay shattered in pieces too small to see. That was enough.